Hello, we're here to discuss Walmart sales forecast for the market forecast class presented by Jake Anderson, Brian Finley, Brian Rutland, and Andrae Wiggins. So the agenda, I'll quickly discuss what exactly we're going to be going over and then we'll get right into it. We will define our forecasting problem, description of the data and what we went through for the data collection process, description of the methodologies and various models that we used. We will discuss in pretty good detail the forecast itself along with our sensitivity analysis and then wrap up with some key takeaways. Forecasting problems. So Walmart is obviously a retail giant, particularly in the United States. The data set involves forecasting the sales for 45 of these Walmart stores in various regions across the United States. Our forecast is based on about 2 years of historical week-over-week sales data for each of these stores, in addition to several covariates, which again we will discuss in pretty great detail. The forecast was initially designed to assist Walmart in planning its inventory, managing its budget, setting targets, and all of those types of things going forward. Actually, the data set that we received was designed to be an employment competition to see who would be able to help forecast Walmart, and then they offered jobs to those that did the best job of that. Data collection process. So as I mentioned, it was provided by Walmart through previous Walmart recruiting effort, which candidates competed in that. Walmart provided the data set to the applicants and asked them to help forecast sales and provide their assumptions and their conclusions of these sales given very specific covariates. The data set, put simply, was huge. There were over 400,000 rows of data given for each of these, and you have a snapshot here below. It varies from date, which as we said varies week over week, their store number, which was assigned 1 through 45, the department, which we identified. Departments could vary from grocery to outdoors, to your pharmaceutical departments, the weekly sales numbers, the outdoor temperature given in Fahrenheit, the fuel cost that week, markdowns, which include various promotions. There are actually 5 different markdowns, the consumer price index that week, the United States unemployment rate, holiday yes or no, so it's just a binary there, and the store size given in square feet. Methodology and model. So based on the data that was available, we determined a big regression model would be the most effective to identify forecasted sales by store. We ran 4 different regression models with these various inputs in an effort to minimize our forecasting error. The baseline for each of these was actually sales data for each store during our 104-week calibration set, and you can see below the sample data that's shown. 2 of these models use various covariate data as well, and each model forecasted a 39-week validation set.
Alright, so the first model we did, we essentially just estimated sales for aggregating all stores, which is essentially the output was just the average store sales across all the 45 stores that we looked at. You can see that the fit for this forecast is quite poor, owing to the variation in the store size and regional disparities, as well as the temporal component in terms of store sales varying week over week. So this was just sort of to get a baseline against which to compare future models. Model 2 was an individual model where we generated a coefficient for each store that essentially represented the average store sales per week in that store across a 2.5-year span. And you can see that the fit and the forecast are actually quite good for this. The forecast MAPE is a little bit better than the fit MAPE because you end up having the holiday seasons of both fell within the calibration set, and so the variation accorded to the increased sales of the Christmas season end up making the fit to be not quite as good in that. You'll see that this is a significant improvement over the aggregate sales as store sales vary dramatically from store to store, but that this shows you there's not an enormous variation week to week, even taking into account none of the covariates in the data. So model 3 was a pure covariate forecast where we took into account a number of the covariates in the data set, including the outdoor temperature, dummy variable for if it was a holiday that week, the store size and square footage, and the store type, which includes whether it's a supercenter or not. We ran a correlation matrix across all of the covariates, and we found that many of them were correlated. So consumer price index was highly correlated to the date, since it's largely based on inflation, as well as to the unemployment rate and the markdown level. We also looked at, there was a number of discounts of variables given that represented discounting in the store, and we found that those didn't improve the model forecast. Consumer price index also did not improve the model forecast. We attempted log transformations of the actual sales data and log transformations of the square footage, and found that none of these variations improved the forecast over just a simple covariate involving just a few of the parameters given. And so you can see that the fit and forecast, again, the forecast MAPE is a little bit better than the fit MAPE, owing to the fact that the holiday season is not included in the validation set, but that the fit is dramatically worse for a pure covariate model where all stores have the same coefficients than it was for an independent model where each store has an independent coefficient, but there are no covariates. And Model 4 was an attempt to combine both the individual component of Model 2 and the covariate component of Model 3. So there is a baseline sales coefficient that was unique for each store, as well as covariates for the same covariates we saw in Model 3. And what you see is it actually doesn't improve the fit at all over Model 2. So including covariates for things like temperature, a binary for holiday, the store size, square footage, none of these things actually improve the fit over the second model. And what this essentially means is that the variation that was encapsulated within the individual variable or coefficient for each store combines together all of those covariate disparities, and that there's not a lot of differences in terms of the impact square footage has for each store compared to each other. It's pretty much the same across all the stores. In terms of the sensitivity analysis, we essentially looked at the overall range for a couple of the variables, store size, temperature, and consumer price index, and we compared what our model says sales would be at the minimum end of the range and the maximum end of the range for each of these. And so you can see store size varies dramatically. The largest store is almost 10 times the size of the smallest store, and the impact that this has on sales is quite dramatic. Whereas for temperature and consumer price index, there was a positive correlation for consumer price index and a negative correlation for temperature, but that negative correlation for temperature largely demonstrates that the holiday season falls within the winter months when the temperature is colder, and consumer price index basically demonstrates not an increase in volume of goods sold, but just that the goods sold were more expensive. And they did not vary too dramatically across the sample set, and so these have a much smaller impact on sales. Store size is by far the biggest predictor of sales that we found. As for key takeaways, as we mentioned, the individual model had the lowest MAPE, and the best predictor for week-to-week sales is simply what the average sales are in each given store. Past sales in that store forecast future sales. But a covariate model attempting to predict sales for any given store based on a number of the covariates did not have a great fit. It was significantly worse than just the individual model. But it could be used to predict what sales in a new store might be given its size.